Good morning, I'm Dan DeRosa with 19 News Now. We're bringing you digital coverage of what we expect to be a pretty major announcement from the Ohio Governor, Mike DeWine. Going to take you into where the news conference is going to be held. He's not quite there yet, but that gives us time to set up what we are about to hear. For a couple of years now, the state of Ohio has been dealing with this issue of Dr. Richard Strauss. He was a team doctor at Ohio State in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and he is now accused of sexually assaulting some 300 athletes, mostly male, at the Ohio State University. Those 300 individuals are suing the school for what they claim the school knew and did nothing about. We need to preface that Dr. Richard Strauss committed suicide in 2005. So this isn't about charges, but it is about what the school knew, what the state knew, and what we're expecting to hear from Ohio Governor Mike DeWine. This news conference that was supposed to begin at 11 is sort of an explanation into the Ohio Medical Board, what they knew and when they knew it. This is going to have ramifications not just at Ohio State University, but this is going to be heard and will be national news really across the country as we find out exactly what Ohio State knew, what doctors knew, and they move forward with what it will most likely be a multi-million-dollar lawsuit from those 300 athletes who say they were fondled inappropriately by the team doctor. Before we get to the news conference, I want to play a story that was done by our own Alan Cohen at the release of the last report, sort of the preliminary report of what we're going to hear today, because it's really going to set the stage for what we're about to hear. Take a listen.
The long-awaited report into the alleged abuse of male athletes at Ohio State by team Dr. Richard Strauss landed with a thud among several former athletes who say they were victims.
Though Ohio State has offered an apology for failing to prevent and address the abuse, it must now accept responsibility for the grievous and widespread harm it caused. Responsibility starts with transparency.
Several alleged victims and their attorneys held a conference call today with reporters. Large sections of the 182-page report released last week are redacted, and the names of the assistant coaches, including Congressman Jim Jordan, an assistant wrestling coach at the time, are deliberately left out, making it impossible to see what he told investigators.
Anonymous people who knew about this abuse and who did nothing. Why are they anonymous? Why is OSU hiding this information from the public?
In a statement tonight,
we're going to jump out of that story because, as you see, Ohio Governor Mike DeWine has just taken the podium. This is going to be what should be a difficult sort of news conference. Some of the details, we want to warn you, depending on what the governor says and releases, could be tough to hear. But this is something that a lot of people around the country have been looking for answers to. Take a look inside the news conference now.
May I sign an executive order creating a special working group and task them with examining the 1996 State Medical Board of Ohio's investigation into Dr. Richard Strauss. Some of the members of the working board are with me here today, and I want to thank them very, very much for their work. They've done I think a very commendable job, and I appreciate their work very, very much. So we're here this morning to report to you the group's findings and to announce action that I'm taking in response to their findings. Quickly to recap, Dr. Richard Strauss, who committed suicide in 2005, worked as a doctor for the Ohio State University's athletic department and/or student health center from the late 1970s to the mid-1990s. An investigation report commissioned by the Ohio State University and released this year found that the doctor sexually assaulted at least 177 students, all male patients, during that period of time. The university's investigation found that some university officials knew about the abuse as early as 1979, but did not stop the doctor from seeing student patients until 1996. and never notified law enforcement. Again, all that was in Ohio State's report. Strauss then went on to open an off-campus men's clinic before ultimately moving to California to practice medicine there. As the university said in the report, this was clearly an immense failure on behalf of the Ohio State University to protect its students from a predator physician. But today, we are focusing on what the State Medical Board of Ohio did or did not do in regard to Dr. Strauss's conduct. The report that was commissioned by Ohio State revealed the existence of a 1996 medical board investigation into Strauss. Though the focus and details of that investigation were redacted, citing the medical board cited confidentiality laws. I found that, frankly, to be unacceptable. In situations such as this, I believe transparency is necessary, which is why I created this working group. The public has a right to know these facts. The public has a right to know what the State Medical Board did or did not do at that time. And let me be clear that our purpose is to find out what they did, what they should have done, how well they did, because that is instructive for the future. That helps us as we move forward. It's important that there be light shed upon this past action by the State Medical Board or inaction by the Medical Board. Now, after I announced this group's creation, the Medical Board did ultimately waive its confidentiality of its investigations, and therefore the working group spent weeks examining the files and interviewing those with knowledge of the Medical Board's case. So they went through the files. They also had the opportunity to interview a number of people. As a result of this review, we now know that the staff at the Ohio State Medical Board of Ohio did investigate sexual assault allegations involving Dr. Richard Strauss. And investigators did uncover credible evidence of sexual misconduct. However, sadly, there was no action to remove Strauss's medical license, and sadly, no one notified law enforcement officials. Now, to be clear, not everyone at the Medical Board knew about this case. Those who did, however, failed to take action despite the fact that their own investigator concluded that Dr. Strauss had been, and I quote, performing inappropriate genital exams on male students for years, end of quote. My working group's report, which we are releasing to the public today, will give the public more details about the board's 1996 investigation, but we'll likely never know exactly why the case was ultimately ignored by the Medical Board. Files from February 1997 show that a Medical Board attorney did intend to proceed with the case, but for some reason never did. Today, that enforcement attorney and several others who had the power to move the case forward are deceased. We cannot ask them why the case sat idle until it was closed without citing a reason in 2002. So the case was closed, and we cannot tell why in 2002. Now, one former employee interviewed by our working group described a, and I quote, black hole, end of quote, at the Medical Board then, saying this case basically fell into oblivion. I have deep concerns that there could be other cases similar to this one, cases with clear evidence of sexual misconduct and cases where no action was taken. We don't know that, but we need to find out. That's why today I'm calling on the State Medical Board to examine each and every sexual assault case that was closed without action, at least at a bare minimum, for the last 25 years, which of course is the statute of limitations. I understand that this will be a major undertaking by the medical board, but I shudder to think that there could be other predator physicians still practicing in the state of Ohio or other places in our country. I shudder to think that there could be other doctors out there who, because their case may have gone into a black hole, are still allowed to practice. We need to find that out. I'm asking the state medical board to look for any other cases where there is clear evidence of a sexual assault, yet where no action was taken. I believe those cases should be, if they are found, should be reopened for potential license revocation and also reported to law enforcement. Again, we don't know if there are other ones out there, and that's the tragedy. Ohio has amazing doctors, and I sincerely hope that there are no other predators out there, physicians like Dr. Strauss, but we must be sure this is the right thing to do. In addition, based on one of the recommendations in the working group's report, I'm also asking the medical board to identify and investigate any Ohio medical license holder who knew Strauss was sexually assaulting students or suspected it, but did not report it. That would include any license holder who has an Ohio license today or who had an Ohio license in the past and who might still be alive. Doctors who heard the rumors or saw something suspicious had a legal duty to report it to the board. We need to know if they did. The working group review found that no one from the university, not a single physician, reported anything to the board or to law enforcement. No one said a word. And actually, to the credit, there was a medical board investigator who took it upon herself to open the case in 1996 after learning that Strauss was suspended from treating Ohio students by Ohio State University. The ensuing medical board investigation did identify doctors believed to have suspected or known about Strauss's conduct, yet who failed to report that information and those beliefs. And in yet another failure, staff at the medical board did not open investigations into those physicians who were in the position to stop the repeated sexual abuse of students after student after student, but did not. I believe these doctors should face appropriate consequences, no matter how long ago this failure occurred. Further, the working group recommends that the board look back, the medical board look back not only at physicians connected to the Strauss case, but also at any other sexual assault case where action was pursued against an offending physician, but not pursued against those who failed to report the behavior. I also asked the working group to examine the balance between transparency and confidentiality in medical board investigations. Again, the main reason I was compelled to form this working group is because the information about the board's 1996 investigation was withheld from the public. The board felt that that's what the law required. The medical board did eventually decide to waive confidentiality of its Strauss-related investigation, and copies of records that the board provided are in the working group's report, which you will find. Absolute and confidentiality of investigative files in perpetuity forever does not really serve the public's purpose. There is a reason for confidentiality. There must be a balance between the public's right to know and the privacy of patients and whistleblowers, as well as doctors who were thoroughly investigated and cleared. This report outlines a number of recommendations to really start this discussion. A number of recommendations that the working group feels will protect those privacies while also preventing investigation confidentiality from being used as a shield from oversight. The group suggests that time limits be set on the confidentiality of closed investigations, and that once this time has expired, reports be made available on request with limited redactions. That probably is something that can be done by the board. Further, the working group recommends that certain board members, maybe the executive director or president of the board, also have the authority to authorize the release of investigative materials for good cause, such as in situations like this. Some of these recommendations are going to take a change in the statute. The working group intends to monitor the medical board's progress towards more transparency and has asked the board to report back to them on their progress in October of this year. Finally, I asked the working group to examine the medical board's current policies, practices, and procedures, because it's important to know that the policies of today have improved and would prevent the type of systemic failure that happened in this investigation by the medical board in 1996. The working group has determined that the medical board, and I want to say this very plainly, that this working group has determined that the medical board has made significant strides to address physician impropriety over the last few years. And they're currently implementing further improvements, and so we congratulate them for that. However, there are still some improvements that the working group recommends, and these are all contained in this report. Let me just highlight several of them. One, improving investigative strategy to be more trauma-informed and survivor-focused. Including specially trained victim advocates in the investigation process. 3, improving the quality assurance process to review closed cases to ensure that they were closed appropriately. 4, enhancing communication between the staff and the board on the progress of cases. Next, recommendation, strengthening relationships with law enforcement. And requiring timely notification of sexual assault allegations to the police. And finally, mandating training for board staff on how to recognize sexual abuse, as well as training on the unique aspects surrounding the investigation of sexual crimes. If I could summarize, many of these recommendations are to bring the medical board's practice up to date to really be the state-of-the-art, best practices, what we know today, what victim advocates know, what prosecutors know, that is necessary and appropriate and right in dealing with victims of sexual abuse. I want to thank the working group for their work, and I thank them for being willing to continue to work, to monitor the steps the medical board will take to implement these recommendations. Ultimately, we cannot go back and change the many failures surrounding this case, but we can do everything in our power to make sure that something like this does not happen again. We recognize that lessons learned from the process could also be applicable to other boards, other state boards that regulate the licenses of healthcare professionals or other healthcare fields. Therefore, we will be asking these other boards to report back to the working group within the next few months how they oversee the investigative process and how they work with law enforcement. We will also ask them how they incorporate survivor-centered investigative techniques into their cases and how they balance transparency and confidentiality. We'll be asking this of the following boards, including the nursing board, the dental board, psychology board, and the pharmacy board. And there may be other boards as well. Again, I want to thank this working group. They've done a very, very, very good job. And this is, again, available. This is available to the public. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Governor, it seems like the onus has now been put on physicians that may have known about this as it was happening. But what about other staff at the university? What about coaches? What about other people that may have been under this umbrella?
Those are all appropriate questions. I again want to state what the focus of this investigation was. Ohio State hired people to do what we assume is a thorough investigation. What was lacking, though, is when you read that report, there's a lot that was redacted, and when you looked at why it was redacted, you saw it had to do with an investigation that occurred at the State Medical Board. I didn't find that satisfactory. I said, look, we've got to go see what the State Medical Board knew, when did they know it, what did they do, what did they not do. So the focus of this group was on the State Medical Board and those that they police, those that they license, those whose license are subject to action by the State Medical Board. So in a sense, it was a narrow focus. And the focus was on, as you can see, not just reporting what happened, but making recommendations in the future, but also asking the State Medical Board to go back and see if there were other cases, like the Strauss case, and also to look back and see if there were any doctors who should have reported something, who did not report something, who are still practicing somewhere, and take appropriate action.
Do you plan on broadening that to staff at the university?
I haven't really thought about that. You know, look, there was a thorough report done. That report should speak for itself. You know, I have not really thought about broadening that or not.
Governor, you talked about going back and looking at previous cases where there were sexual assault or sexual abuse claims made to the medical board. Do you have any sense of how many, like the universe of possible claims out there, how many that might be?
I do not, but I'll ask Sarah, who did the staff work, or Tom Stickrath, if either one of you know. I don't know the answer to that question. Why don't you state your name for me?
Sarah Ackman, A-C-K-M-A-N. Based upon the information that the group received, I added up approximately 1,500 cases that would be sexual assault cases that were closed.
And these are all Strauss or different people?
Oh, no, all different. Yes.
Can you give a time frame on that?
25 years.
Thank you.
I know at least one of the doctors involved in this case is out of state now. Do you have any jurisdiction over that, and whether he?
Well, this is a hypothetical for me, but if there is a doctor who the State Medical Board, after going back and looking at this, feels had credible information, did not act appropriately, I assume the appropriate action is for this State Medical Board to refer that information to the State Medical Board where that doctor is practicing. Now, again, I have no information that there's a doctor in another state. I don't know anything about that. But based on that hypothetical, that I think is probably what the State Medical Board would do, and that would be their normal procedure.
Michigan State University paid out $500 million, I believe, in the Larry Nassar abuse case. What kind of exposure do you think Ohio State's have on this?
I don't know. You'd have to ask their counsel. I don't really know what their. That would just be a guess on my part.
Talk to us about House Bill 249 or any of the bills that would impact statute of limitations. Are you supportive of those bills, and
well,
where are they going?
Yeah, I have said that as far as criminal statute of limitations on rape, that we should totally eliminate the statute of limitations. That's been my position. It remains my position. Every case that comes up that's a serious case where the statute is run should be more evidence that this needs to be done. So I feel very, very strongly about it. I would reiterate my request to the state legislature to eliminate the statute of limitations. For those people who are concerned about that someone's going to be charged and not get their day in court, the reality is that it's frankly a lot more difficult after that long period of time for the prosecuting attorney, as Sarah could tell you, has done these cases. And so, you know, you still have to prove your case in court, and you have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. So the statute of limitations should be removed for rape, and we probably should remove it for some of the other sexual assault cases as well.
But some of this case went into a black hole. Did someone fail to report the Strauss case to law enforcement? Should it have been referred to law enforcement? Can you conclude that?
Well, I think so. Yes. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I mean, I think that's yes, absolutely should have been referred to law enforcement. You know, this is a problem that is not unique to this case. This is a unique case because of the immense tragedy of it. But there has been a culture, and that prosecutors have had to deal with about certain places that if there's a sexual assault, that they're handled and they're not reported to police. That is wrong, and as a former prosecutor, I can tell you how frustrating that is, and these cases need to be reported to police. So this is not the only example you're going to find of, on a college campus, something not being reported to the police.
But does that culture exist at the state medical board, and did somebody at the state medical board violate the law by not reporting it?
Well, I have stated really what I know. What the law requires is that if there is if you standard proof is what, Sarah, on knowledge of a felony?
Then
knowingly. Knowingly is the standard. If you knowingly you knew about any felony and did not report it, that becomes a separate crime. Now, those are very difficult cases to prove. Prosecutors will tell you because it goes into what that person knew, when did they know it. Clearly, this, these should have been reported to the police, law enforcement agencies.
Dan DeRose with 19 News Now. We're going to come out of this news conference just to wrap it up here. This was Governor Mike DeWine's task force that he asked to look at the Medical Board of Ohio, the state medical board. They're responsible for licensing doctors across the state of Ohio, and the question was, what did they know about the Richard Strauss case that went from about 1979 to 1997? What did they know? When did they know it? And what did they do? And the governor basically just throwing down the hammer there, saying this was a systemic failure by the Ohio State Medical Board, that they knew in 1997 that a case had been opened. Actually, in 1996, a case had been opened. Questions had started to arise about Dr. Richard Strauss' involvement, what he had been doing to male athletes for years. And as you heard the governor say, one of the employees that was there at the time as that investigation began claims that it just went into a black hole. Basically, that from the medical board's perspective, they looked at it and they did nothing with it. The governor saying, sadly, the biggest piece of injustice here is that the medical board should have gone to the authorities at that point, because they had what they claimed was credible information about the sexual abuse at the hands of one of their doctors. So for whatever reason that they couldn't determine fully, this case just disappeared and really let down a lot of individuals. You heard the governor outline some of the changes that he has requested and is asking of the Ohio State Medical Board, one of which is to take all of the cases for the past 25 years that were allegations of sexual abuse at the hands of a medical professional and reopen those cases. The shocking number that came out of this today was to hear the governor's aide say that that is about 1,500 cases over the past 25 years that now need to be reopened, and see what conclusion was brought on those 1,500 accusations. Did they also fall into a black hole? And if you're asking why 25 years only, is because that's the statute of limitations on a lot of these crimes, whether it's sexual assault or whether it's a rape case. The statute of limitation to bring charges is at about 25 years. We learned a lot here. It doesn't do anything for what is, and you heard the governor say in Ohio State's independent report, they identified 177 victims, but as news of this has come out, there are now 300 or more victims who have signed on to the lawsuit against the Ohio State University because of their lack of action. And that lawsuit, you can see now that this report is out, may also include the Ohio Medical Board, because clearly they knew in 1996 when they opened the investigation and they did nothing. I've been watching your comments along with you on our digital platforms, and I wanted to read this one comment from Teresa, who said the medical board's job is to protect the public. Shame on them. And I think that's exactly what we learned today, is that for whatever reason, and it would be interesting, even though that was a long time ago, yes, 1996 and 1997 was a long time ago. The people who were in charge of the Ohio State Medical Board are no longer with the state, may not even be alive at this point. But for whatever reason, somebody took those reports and that allegation and shoved them into a drawer and said, case closed. And nothing was ever done. So you can see where that lawsuit may also now have to extend to the Ohio Medical Board. I'm going to wrap up our coverage. I want to thank you for watching on our digital platforms. This is how we do it here at 19. When we have news, breaking news, we brought you dash cam video earlier today. We had this news conference from the governor on a very important case that has made headlines nationwide. We bring it to you on our digital platforms because news that's happening now is right here on your digital platforms. I'm Dan DeRose with 19 News Now. I want to thank you for watching.
19 News, first, fair, everywhere.